Hello everyone and welcome to the April edition of TechSpert Talks. I'm Troy Rainey and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's presentation is Troubleshooting Embedded Analytics with Damien Villaret. Damien, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everyone, so I'm Damien. I'm working as a principal technical support engineer here at Qlik. I've been at Qlik since 9 years and my main focus is integrations, which is API mashup extension and authentication.
Definitely, you are the expert in support when it comes to those topics. Today, we're going to be talking about what embedded analytics is in QlikSense. We're going to look at some different methods on how to actually embed charts and objects from QlikSense. We're going to discuss authentication, cover some really important settings when trying to set all that up. Damon's going to walk through a demonstration of those, and we're going to take a look at how to troubleshoot some common issues. Damien, for those of us who aren't that familiar with these terms, what is embedded analytics?
So embedded analytics is when you embed QlikSense charts on a third-party website. We have an example here.
Okay, so this is an app that is using some Qlik objects, right? I see it's about the Oscars.
Yes, what we see here is just a picture, and then we have some Qlik objects that are embedded on the site. And you can actually interact with those Qlik objects, make some selection, which will reflect on all the other objects on the page. You can just also clear the selection here.
Yeah, very cool. So it's the same functionality as a Qlik app, but building those objects into a separate website. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Now, where can we find some documentation on how to actually do this?
There are 3 different ways to embed QlikSense charts, which are iframe integration through the app integration API.
Okay, that's like just taking an entire sheet from an app and putting it into a website.
Yes, you can take the entire sheet, the entire app itself, and you can navigate through the different sheets in the app.
Oh, okay.
As you would do if you open the app from the hub, but you would have that in an iframe on your own website.
Okay, and what's the other methods?
Then we have the single integration API, which it's just exposing a single object, which is a sheet or a single chart.
Okay, that's just like we saw in the Oscars demo, just pulling out individual charts and objects without the framework of the app.
Yes, that would be similar.
And you mentioned the third?
So the third one is using Nebula.js or capability APIs to embed charts directly. You don't need to go through an iframe for that.
Okay.
You would just call the API and the API will return the chart in HTML element on your site.
Okay, given that there are different ways to do similar things, which method would you recommend?
Really depends on what you want to do and how much coding skill you have, because if you go through the iframe is much more simpler. You just need basically to copy the URL, put it in an iframe, and then you just need to handle the authentication part. While if you use a mashup, then you will need to code to display those objects, but you have much more control on what you do in the mashup. You can customize basically any of the object.
Okay, much more customizable, but requires some skill.
Yes.
All right.
Performance-wise, also a mashup will be faster than iframes.
Ah, that's a good thing to know. Are there any important policies or settings to allow this functionality of embedding objects?
Yes, so in order to be able to embed, there are a few settings that need to be set. This article explanation on the different settings.
Okay.
For example, you need to make sure that your QlikSense server is running on HTTPS and the website where you're embedding is also running HTTPS. You need to set SAM site settings, and you also need to set the host allow list.
Can you show us in the QMC where to find those settings?
Yes, first of all, let's look at the HTTPS part. By default, HTTPS is enabled.
So QlikSense Enterprise defaults automatically to use HTTPS.
Yes, and from here you can see it will be on port 443 by default.
Okay.
And you would also need to make sure that the certificate that you have applied is trusted from the client. So by default, there is no certificate applied here. For demonstration purposes, I have just installed this certificate on the machine where I'm gonna demo this.
So basically, you've got the same certificate installed and trusted on the QlikSense enterprise machine and the server hosting the site where we'll be embedding.
Yes.
Okay, so where were those other settings?
From here, we're all good, but we need now to check the virtual proxy settings.
Okay.
Either go from the start page or you can go to here to the virtual proxy settings. And here you need to make sure that you have set the same site attribute.
And what do those different options mean there?
So no attribute means you let the browser decide basically. So in Chrome it default to lax.
It would take the setting from the Chrome security settings.
Yes.
Okay.
And none means that you can embed from a different website, while a strict means that you cannot embed.
And lax means?
Lax means you can embed from the same website.
Basically, lax would means you can only embed from this same machine that's hosting QlikSense.
Yes.
Okay, and none allows you to embed from any website.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then we also need to make sure that the host list contains the name of the server on which we are embedding the QlikSense chart.
Now, when embedding, is there some sort of authentication that's passed so that the website where you're embedding those objects recognizes the user as a QlikSense user?
In the same way that we would connect in a QlikSense hub, you also need to be authenticated to see the chart. In this article here, we have some different recommendations based on which type of authentication you want to use.
So here you've outlined a lot of different authentication types that you could consider, and you've discussed them, added links to where you can find more information, even rank them in order of skill level so people can understand kind of what they might be getting into.
That's correct.
Is it possible to embed objects and run it without authentication?
Yes, so if you want to embed and see those objects without authentication as an anonymous user, you would need to have a specific type of license.
So this article shows the types of licenses needed to run with anonymous access.
Yes.
So I guess I have a follow-up to that. Is the capability to embed objects, is that free?
Yes, there is no extra cost for embedding objects.
All right. Can you demonstrate for us how this all works?
Sure. So first of all, we're gonna demo how to use the single integration API.
Okay. That's just the single object. So which chart will we actually be embedding?
For example, take this bar chart.
Okay.
Right click on it, we click on share, embed. We will have the URL that we need to put on our web page in order to embed.
Okay, so you just hit the copy button to grab that code to embed the chart into an iframe.
Yes, so I'm just gonna click on copy, open code editor.
Is there a preferred code editor that you use, or is just Notepad++ works fine?
For simple projects, and Notepad++ will just be fine.
Okay.
So here I've just prepared a very simple HTML structure, and I'm gonna paste the URL that I've just copied.
Okay, just copied it right in there.
Save this file.
And you're saving this on the machine that's hosting the website, right?
Yes, so I'm using IIS for this demo.
All right.
And I'm saving this file in the IIS root folder.
Okay, great.
So now we're gonna go again in our browser.
Yeah, let's test it out. So it's the name of the machine hosting the site and the name of that HTML file.
Yes. I'm just gonna open the browser DevTools also.
And how do you open the browser developer tools?
So you can either press F12 or you can go to the Chrome menu here, go to More Tools and go to Developer Tools.
Okay. So when I open those up, I'm always a little confused at first because I'm not used to using them all the time. Where in the developer tools do you like to look when you're monitoring traffic?
So I usually go first to the Network tab, which is where you will see all the traffic on this page.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So now I'm gonna start loading the page and see what is happening in the browser DevTools also.
All right, so like we saw in the HTML document, it was going to say my first heading and then my first paragraph, and below that should be that bar chart that we saw in the app. Okay, so obviously things aren't working as expected. What can you tell by looking at the developer tools on the right?
So here in the developer tools, we can see a graph of all the requests that are done.
Uh-huh.
And from this pattern, we can see that it's just looping forever.
I'm assuming this will time out at some point. So how would you go about troubleshooting this issue?
I'm gonna check any of the QlikSense URL to see what is happening in there.
Okay.
I'm just gonna stop the recording here.
Okay. So the page will continue to try and load, but the dev tools have stopped recording the feed. So how do you search this?
Yes, so I'm gonna filter on the QlikSense server name so that I know which requests are done to QlikSense.
Okay, so all those, I see the initiator is test.html, so that's your IIS server trying to communicate with the QlikSense server.
Yes, qlik01.domain.local, which is my QlikSense server, so it asks to authenticate, so it redirects. Goes here where it is authenticate, and then it say found redirect, so it's redirecting to the app.
Okay.
And in the response header here, we can see that it asks the browser to set the cookie.
But nothing's really popping up as an error. Nothing's showing in red. Well, there is a warning in there.
There is a warning here. We can see the warning also here is showing in yellow. And when you have a cookie that is showing in yellow here, it means that the browser doesn't accept it.
Okay.
So there is something wrong with this cookie. So we can just expand this here and check the cookie properties.
Sure.
We have those properties and same site, and we can see that same site is set to lax.
Right, right. You mentioned a troubleshooting checklist. Can we take a look at that?
Yes. So let's check all of those. In this demo, we're only using one iframe, so we don't need to check the fourth point.
Okay. I see it finally timed out and it gave us unknown error, which tells us nothing. But you've kind of already dug in and found that at least one of the settings, the same site setting, was set to lax. So we know there's something there that's wrong.
Yes, so let's check the different settings from our checklist.
Okay. So how would you check if HTTPS is being used?
In the QlikSense URL, we have HTTPS, so we are using HTTPS on the QlikSense.
Okay. What about the site where we're embedding?
So we see here that it's not secure.
All right, so that is basically telling you it's not using HTTPS, so that's part of the problem.
Yes, so that would tell us that it's either not using HTTPS or that the certificate is not trusted.
Okay, so where would you go to correct that?
So I'm using IIS to host my web page, so I'm gonna go in the IIS settings, and in the default website, I'm gonna right click and go to edit bindings.
All right.
Here I can indeed confirm that there is only one binding for HTTP on port 80. I'm gonna add the binding for HTTPS instead on port 443, and I'm gonna select a certificate here. This is a certificate that I have pre-installed.
Okay. All right, so now we have HTTPS listed there. So that's correcting one problem. What else was on our checklist?
So the next thing on our checklist was the same site settings.
All right, was that in proxies?
So that was in virtual proxies. And I'm gonna click the virtual proxy that I'm using for this integration. And I'm gonna go in advanced, it is set to lax, and we would need it to be set to none.
That's a setting that allows embedding in other sites than the QlikSense server machine.
Yes, for the browser to accept the cookie from a different site, you need to have the same site attribute set to none.
Okay.
Apply this, that will cause Qlik proxy service to do a soft restart. We're gonna disconnect it from this page.
Okay, so there's also the host allow list. Where do we find that?
Which is also under advanced.
Right.
Just add the name of the server from where we want to embed, which is dc1.domain.local. Apply.
And does it matter if it's the fully qualified domain name or the IP address?
So it needs to be the name that you use in your browser when you access the site.
Okay, that makes sense. Shall we try and reload? And right away I see we've got the little secure icon, the padlock on the URL. Visually I can see that we're running HTTPS. The traffic on the right is moving, but it's still not fully loading, is it?
Actually, I believe that's fully loaded, but the iframe is too small.
Ah, okay.
So that's why we're not seeing the whole thing. So we can just specify pixel so that we can see the whole chart.
Okay,
And refresh.
there we go. So that seems to be working very smoothly. Can you show us how it works with the full app integration?
Yes, so for the full app integration, choose any of the sheets that you want to embed, or you could even choose the app overview if you want to have the app overview in your iframe. And you can just copy directly the URL
Okay.
and then just replace this URL in the iframe. So the source of the URL here, you can just replace it and save this file. Go back to our browser and just refresh the page. Now we will have the full UI here.
Wow, so it's got everything there.
So we have that top menu. You can select bookmarks, see the different sheets. So you have the full UI in this.
That's great. You mentioned there's a third method of doing this, which is a little more complicated, but that was using the Nebula JavaScript.
Yes, so we're gonna demo how to create a mashup using Nebula.js.
And where do we find information on how to do that?
So you would go to Qlik.dev, and on this page there is an example on how to build a simple mashup using Nebula.js. This sample is aimed at QlikSense SaaS.
Right.
This article explains the differences.
Okay, so you've broken it down specifically to using client-managed QlikSense Enterprise. So how do we get started?
So first of all, let's open a command line, and I'm gonna navigate to my project folder. And once I'm in this folder, I'm gonna create a new project. You can just simply copy this line.
Okay.
Note that you have to have node.js installed before you can run this command.
Right.
Paste this. I'm just gonna run this.
So it's actually starting to create the mashup in the background.
Okay, so now the project is created. So in our project folder, we will have a new folder called hello-cm, which contains our project.
There it is. All right.
So the next step is to go to this project and edit it. I'm gonna go in the src folder. I will need to edit the index.js file.
Okay. There it is.
And edit in Node++. Modified those 3 lines here to match my QlikSense server. Here I'm gonna put the QlikSense server name.
Okay.
A web integration ID is specific to SaaS, so I don't need that line. And then I would need the app ID.
And we can get that from the URL of the app, right?
Yes, just copy the app ID from the URL here. Save this file.
Okay. What was the next step according to the article?
So the next step is to edit the connect.js file. I'm just gonna replace the whole content by the code in the article.
Okay. Now I see it's got the $ variable, so it's picking up the URL and the app ID from another file.
Yes, so it's reading the URL and the app ID from the index.js.
Okay, great.
Save this file. And the next step would be to go back to index.js to add the objects that I want to display.
I'm gonna grab the same chart.
Yes, so I'm gonna right click, share, go to embed.
Oh, there it is, right below the preview. Cool.
First, copy the piece of code. There's a placeholder for this code. I would just need to replace this.
Okay, and then it's just missing the object ID.
Copy the object ID from my app and just save the file. The last thing that we want to do before we start the project is just to use HTTPS on the project.
So this is something specific for JSON that you need to configure the package to run an HTTPS.
Yes, so for this sample, we're using a Node.js component, which is called Parcel, that acts as a web server.
Okay.
So I'm just gonna copy those arguments here and just add them to my command line.
Okay.
So here basically it says I'm gonna use port 444. Then we indicate we want to use HTTPS, and we need to indicate which certificates we want to use and the host name. So we can just save this.
And that host name, is that the name of the server for Sense or the server where we're embedding?
It's the server where we're embedding.
Okay. All right, so are you ready to try and run this?
Yes, so I'm now ready to run. So first of all, I need to move to my project, type cd, the name of the folder, and then you just run npm run start.
Uh-oh, could not get available port.
Our server name is not correct. We forgot to
Update it.
here it's dc1.domain.local, not dc1.example.local.
Okay.
So we can save this file again, and let's try to run it.
All right, it automatically opens up a browser tab going to that specific port that we specified, 444. I can see that it's running HTTPS.
Yeah, well, let's actually refresh and see if there is actually any error.
Okay, so now we've recorded the traffic with the refresh. It was quick and it stopped. So you're going to the end there and seeing what it's doing. No engine available. So it tried to open the document and it couldn't, and it's getting a no engine available error.
Could be some cache. So that was actually some cache in the browser that was causing the issue.
Ah, okay. But by clearing the cache or just not reading from the cache, that resolved it. There it is. The object is embedded into a simple site, and it's got that object directly from the app.
Yes, so it's always good really when you debug something that you click on disable cache here, so you make sure that you don't have some previous cache from your previous trials.
Okay, now everything's been working relatively according to plan, but if things go wrong, what might go wrong and how could someone find some more information?
So there could be different things that can go wrong. You usually go to here in the browser DevTools, just go to the WebSocket connection.
Okay, and how do you identify the WebSocket connection?
What you would do first is to filter on WebSocket here, click on WS.
Okay.
And then you would find the lines that have your app ID.
There it is.
And then you would go in the messages. Here in the messages, you have the different request and response.
All right, so you can see step by step what's actually happening there. I see opening the doc, creating a session, starting the app layout, finding the specific object. It's kind of cool to see how it all breaks down.
Here you have everything that happens in the engine API. And in Chrome, the requests are displaying green and the response are displaying white.
Okay.
So identify the response to specific requests, you need to check the ID. So for example, here I have ID 1. So if I want to check the response to that specific request, I will need to check the white lines that have ID 1.
Okay, so you can match up the request with the response.
Yes. So here I can see that the fourth line has ID 1. So that's actually the response to the first line.
Okay. But basically, this kind of breaks it down, and if something's wrong, you could identify exactly where it went wrong using this feed.
Yes, that's correct. You can identify where it went wrong, and you can trace back. For example, if you have an error, you could just filter here on error,
Okay.
and then trace back the object that returned the error.
Now, how can this be downloaded so it can be shared with someone at Qlik Support to help with an investigation?
So there's a little button here to export the HAR file,
Okay.
which will also include all those requests in the WebSocket. To be aware, this WebSocket might not get recorded if you open the browser DevTool after loading the page.
Right.
So I would usually recommend that you refresh the page before exporting the file.
Okay, that makes sense. Do you have an example of another issue that users might run into?
Yes, let's try to open this mashup as a user 2.
Okay.
Which basically doesn't have access to any app from the hub.
So if user 2 tried to access that same link to the embedded object, what would happen?
So let's try to open the mashup with the browser DevTools open and see.
Okay.
So let's load the mashup.
Okay, we can see that it's all gray and doesn't seem to be loading.
So let's see what is happening.
So if you did like you mentioned before and filter on WebSockets.
Let's go to messages. So we can see there is an open doc here and the response is on license access denied.
All right, so this user 2 does not have a license, at least according to this log here.
Yes, so let's go to the Qlik Management Console and check if the user has a license or not.
Okay.
and I'm going to license management, user access allocation. So that might be a little bit different based on the type of license that you're using.
But I'm looking at the list on the left and I don't see user 2 listed there.
Correct. So let's allocate a license.
Okay.
Let's find user 2 and click allocate.
All right.
So let's get back to our Nebula.js mashup, refresh the page to see if it goes any better.
So again, it looks the same. It's gray and not loading, but do we have the same error?
Let's check in the WebSocket. Okay, so we see a little bit more lines here.
It does have an error there at the end.
A 403 error, a forbidden,
Oh.
which is object read error.
So yeah, what is that telling you?
Well, it's telling me that the user doesn't have access to the object that I want to display.
Okay.
So the first thing to check is actually if the user has access to the app itself. So we can go back to the headers tab and we can find the ID of the app. So the simplest is to just copy this ID here and try to open the app from the hub.
I would expect this to fail since it looks like user 2 has no available apps from the hub. Access denied. So where would you check the access for this app?
Back to the Qlik management console, and I'm gonna go to apps.
And the app we're trying to access is Canadian wildfire analysis story.
Yes, so we can actually see here the ID is the same. You could just filter here on the ID to make sure that you are acting on the correct app.
Oh, that's a great tip.
So here we can see that the owner is administrator and it's not published to any stream.
Ah, so it's not working because it's not published to a stream that user 2 has access to. Shall we publish it then?
Publish, and just select a stream.
All right, so if we try it again with user 2, hopefully now it will work.
So now we can see that we can access the app.
Yeah, one issue at a time, but we're solving multiple issues. Let's try and load the mashup.
Just refresh.
Success. Okay. What else can you think of that someone might run into in trying to set this up?
So one other common issue would be that you're trying to use a type of chart which is not supported by Nebula.js.
Okay, so there are some limitations to what type of objects you can actually embed depending on the method you're using.
Yes, so if you just search for Nebula.js supported charts, go in the visualization section.
Okay, so I see a long list of charts on the left, and all those are supported. Do you have an example of an error message you would see if you embedded a chart that is not supported?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what you would see if it's running an unsupported version. Is there any way to get around that type of issue?
Yes, you could use a library that is called Picasso.js instead.
Okay, and Picasso is just a different JavaScript library.
Yes, that's a different JavaScript library that is provided by Qlik, open source.
Great. Well, just so everyone knows, we'll be including the links with everything we've been showing today along with the recording of this session on Qlik Community. And now it's time for Q&A. Everyone, please submit your questions in the Q&A panel on the left side of your On24 console. Damien, let's take some questions from the top. I see the first question is, where can I find information about how to do this with a reverse proxy?
We actually have a KB article about how to set up QlikSense with a reverse proxy. So this is an example on how you would do it for IIS, but that would be similar also for the type of reverse proxy.
Okay, so let's go through all the little steps that are necessary to get that set up. That's great. Next question, how much is a license to allow embedding analytics?
There's no extra cost to use embedded analytics compared to a regular QlikSense license.
Okay, so anybody can do this.
Yes, you would just need to make sure, for example, if you want to use anonymous access, as we've said in the presentation, that you have the correct type of license.
Okay, great. Next question. How to configure QlikSense with SSL offloading, where the SSL certificate is installed on a load balancer.
Okay, so we don't have a step-by-step for that, but we have some general information about SSL offloading in an article. So here in this article, there's some general information regarding SSL offloading.
I'm not too familiar with this term. Could you kind of summarize what SSL offloading is, what that means?
Yes, yes. So basically, SSL offloading is when you have a reverse proxy or a load balancer in front of
Okay.
QlikSense, and you're using HTTPS between your client and your reverse proxy or load balancer, but you're using HTTP between the reverse proxy and QlikSense.
All right. Interesting. Yeah, what do we have here in this article? Just some kind of best practices for how that would work.
Yes, some kind of best practices. And also when it comes to embedding, as a connection to QlikSense comes HTTP. So QlikSense sees that connection as HTTP. We've talked earlier about the same site settings, which I can show again in the. Here you have two sets of settings. Ones are for HTTPS and the other ones are for HTTP. When you use SSL offloading, you need to use the one for HTTP instead of the one for HTTPS because the incoming connection to QlikSense is seen as HTTP.
Okay. So would that same site attribute for HTTP need to be set to none as well?
Yes, so you will need to set it to none here and
Okay.
as secure for HTTP. And actually, those two settings they are solely used for this kind of case where you have SSL offloading, because embedding is not allowed on HTTP. So those two settings here, they might be confusing because you might think that you would be able to embed with HTTP, but those settings actually they are for the specific case where you're using a reverse proxy with SSL offloading.
Well, that's interesting to know that the only reason those settings are there in the QMC is for this specific use case. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that. Next question we have is, I have an issue where the embedded analytics works fine in Firefox, but in Chrome it asks for credentials and loads forever. Any idea why?
So usually this is actually also caused by SAM site. You need to make sure that SAM site is set properly because Chrome enforce SAM site.
Okay. So it sounds like that's a fairly common issue that people might run into, is that one setting right there.
Yes, that's a very common one.
Next question. Is it possible to do this with QlikView charts as well?
Yes, so it's possible to embed through an iframe or embed even as a mashup, but I would rather recommend that for this kind of implementation that you move to QlikSense because it is much more flexible and has much more rich functionalities when it comes to embedding.
Okay, great. So it's nice to know it's possible, but yeah, just there's a lot more options with QlikSense. The next question. What could cause a Google Maps extension that's been working fine for years to suddenly go blank for users when they try to filter on the map?
So yeah, usually this kind of issue would be due to some kind of change in the Google API. We've seen that several times in the past. So you need to make sure that the code of the extension is updated to use the latest Google APIs.
Okay, yeah, that can happen if it gets kind of static for a while, that the APIs get changed in the background after the extension's been developed. Next question is, how would you investigate bad request 400 errors when authorization fails?
First thing that I would do is to check in the browser DevTools on which endpoint is that bad request being thrown.
Okay, so like but where the authorization is breaking.
Yes, so where exactly on which URL, because it might look like an authorization issue, authentication issue, but it might be, for example, that the host whitelisted not stage properly, because that would also return error 400. And on the Qlik side, what I would check is the proxy logs. The Qlik proxy logs in the trace folder, you have a file that is called audit proxy and which usually records these types of error.
Okay, great. Next question. Are there any specific log files for embedded charts?
So there is not a specific one for embedded charts. So the first thing that you would do is to check the browser DevTools, check where it fails. If it fails on the authentication part, then you would need to check the proxy logs the Qlik proxy logs and see what
Okay.
is happening. If it fails later on, it's something in the WebSocket in the engine, then you would need to check the engine logs.
And can you show us where those are?
So the logs are located by default in program data, Qlik, sense, go to log. So first of all, you have the proxy logs here. And usually the first log that I check is audit proxy 1.
Okay.
More general issues on the proxy service itself, I will check system. If it's issued certificates, I will check security.
Great. I think that's helpful, getting to actually see where to find those log files. Next question. Is it possible to allow users to open multiple tabs with different sessions in each? We're using anonymous access as a note there.
For this kind of use case, you would either use an alternate identity, specifying a slash identity, slash like any random string.
Okay.
Or you would use alternate state, but that would require you modify the app so that it looks how you want.
Next question. Any idea how to see variable values from an app to show in a mashup?
For variables, you would need to first call the API to fetch the variable, which you can find from the engine API reference on QlikDev. Go to API and go to JSON RPC API, which is the engine API, and you would go to the reference. Getting variable is an action on the dock, right? Get variable. We see this one is deprecating the get variable, so we need to either use one of those two, get variable by ID or get variable by name. So get variable by name is probably the easiest one. So you can get the variable by name, and it will return you that variable, and then you can get the value of the variable, and then you can display it. So here in generic variable, you can. So you would find the info from get layout or get properties.
Okay.
And then you can display that, parse it, and display it in your mashup.
Great. It's nice just seeing this library of code that people can use. Next question is, does hosting embedded apps affect server performance any differently than having a normal session open?
So that's a kind of a tricky question, because if you do exactly the same thing that you're doing in the hub, then it would just act the same. It wouldn't affect performance more than it would when you access from the hub. But then it depends on what you do in your mashup, what kind of actions. Make sure that you don't enter any loops that would cause performance issues.
Okay.
Make sure that you keep things simple.
So really, it depends on the activity against the app, but
yes, okay, that's correct.
And we have time for one last question, and that is, we're seeing a page redirecting users to a login URL in a loop. Any idea how to investigate or correct?
So if it's going through a loop, I would check the browser DevTools and see actually if the authentication is succeeded or not. Because this kind of symptoms usually indicates that the authentication goes through, but that cookie cannot get saved, probably because it doesn't have the correct properties.
Okay.
So that's similar to the first issue that we ran into actually when testing the single integration API.
Right, so you just sort of look through the DevTools on WebSocket and follow the thread there.
Yes.
Well, that's great. That's all the questions we have time for today. Damien, thank you very much for sharing with us. I think this will be helpful for a lot of people. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And if you have any further questions, just reach out to us on the community. Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this Techspert Talks session. Here is our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.